Welcome back to Power in the Pause. I'm your host, Chelsea, and this is the space where we slow down, breathe for a second, and remember that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is pause. Today, I want to talk about something I think a lot of women carry without necessarily calling it what it is, and that's shame. Not just like the big, obvious kind. I mean, the everyday kind. The kind that makes you second guess what you said after you said it. The kind that makes you wonder if you talked too much, if you were too loud, too emotional, too ambitious, maybe too needy or too confident. Too much. The kind that has you saying sorry when you actually didn't do anything wrong. Because shame doesn't always look like hating yourself, sis. Sometimes shame looks like editing yourself. And then eventually, you can get so good at editing yourself that you forget what you actually wanted to say. So let's pause. Take a breath in and slowly let it out. Again, inhale through the nose, pause, and exhale through the mouth. Keep breathing and just notice what happens when you don't have to fix anything. You don't have to perform. You don't have to be impressive. You don't have to make yourself easier to digest. For just this moment, you get to take up the space you're already in. Okay, one more breath. Inhale through the nose. Pause. And exhale through the mouth. Okay, sis. Let's talk about shame. Shame doesn't always sound like, I'm ashamed. Sometimes it sounds like, maybe I shouldn't have said that. I probably shouldn't ask. It's not a big deal. I don't want to bother anyone. I don't want to seem difficult. Who am I to do that? And some of those thoughts can sound reasonable. That's what makes shame so sneaky. You're not walking around thinking, I'm a terrible person. You're just constantly finding little reasons to make yourself smaller. Maybe you call it you're being easygoing, being understanding, being humble. Maybe you see yourself being the bigger person. Sometimes you genuinely are those things, and sometimes you're afraid of what might happen if you stop being them. Because shame teaches you to monitor yourself. You're not just experiencing the moment, you're watching yourself experience the moment. How did I sound? Was that stupid? Did I talk too much? Do they think I'm annoying? Was I too confident? And then suddenly, you're not even enjoying the dinner. You're analyzing your performance at the dinner. You're not just having a conversation. You're reviewing yourself in the conversation. And sis, that's exhausting. I don't want to be too much. Okay, let's talk about that phrase. I don't want to be too much. Too much for who? Because women are constantly trying to find this magical middle ground where we're enough to be interesting, but not enough to make anyone uncomfortable. And sis, that place does not exist. You can spend your entire life trying to become the exact version of yourself that makes everyone else comfortable, and somebody will still have a problem with you. So maybe the question isn't, how do I make sure nobody's uncomfortable with me? Maybe we need to start asking ourselves, why have I decided their discomfort is my responsibility? Because those are two very different things. Taking up space. Okay, I want to be clear. Taking up space doesn't mean dominating every room. It doesn't mean your needs matter more than everyone else's. And it definitely doesn't mean that you never apologize. But it does mean that you can exist without constantly negotiating your right to be there. You can have an opinion without immediately softening it. You can say no without writing a 3-paragraph explanation. You can want something without pretending that you don't care. And you can take the compliment, sis. You can be proud of yourself and you can ask for more. You can change your mind and you can say, actually, that doesn't work for me. And you don't have to follow it with, but I'm sorry. Guilt isn't shame. And here's where I want to bring in just a little bite sized piece of psychology. Guilt and shame are not the same thing. Guilt says, I did something I don't feel good about. And shame says, there's something wrong with me. Guilt can be useful. If I hurt someone, I can acknowledge it, apologize, repair it, and then learn from it. Shame wants punishment. Shame takes something you did and turns it into a statement about who you are. I made a mistake becomes I'm a failure. I upset someone becomes I'm a bad person. Someone didn't like me becomes there's something wrong with me. And once you believe something is wrong with you, shrinking starts to make sense. Because if I'm the problem, maybe the solution is to become less of me. But what if you don't need to become less? What if you don't need to be less emotional? Maybe you need better boundaries. What if you don't need to be less ambitious? Maybe you need people around you who aren't threatened by your ambition. What if you don't need to be less sensitive? Maybe you just need to stop treating your sensitivity like it's a character flaw. And what if you don't need to be less? What if you need to become less ashamed of being fully yourself? Because an unashamed woman isn't a woman who never feels embarrassed. She isn't fearless. She's just not constantly abandoning herself to be accepted. She can make a mistake without turning it into an identity. She can disappoint someone without deciding she's a disappointment. She can be misunderstood without immediately scrambling to explain herself. And she can be disliked. That one is hard. She can be disliked because sometimes the price of taking up space is realizing that not everybody is going to like the version of you who finally stopped shrinking. And that doesn't mean you did something wrong. Sometimes it means you stopped being convenient. So, sis, I want you to sit with this question this week. Where am I shrinking myself because I'm afraid of being too much? And then ask yourself, what would it look like to take up just a little more space from there? Not all the space, not everyone else's space, just yours. Because you don't have to earn the right to occupy your own life. You don't have to be quieter to be worthy. You don't have to be easier to be loved. You don't have to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. And you don't have to wait until you feel completely confident to start taking up space. You can be nervous and still speak. You can be uncomfortable and still say no. You can be afraid of judgment and still let yourself be seen. That's the work, sis. Not becoming a woman who never feels shame, but becoming a woman who doesn't let shame make all of her decisions. Thank you for spending this time with me today on Power in the Pause. If this episode resonated with you, I want you to take this question with you this week. Where am I making myself smaller so someone else can be comfortable? And when you notice it, don't shame yourself for it, sis. Just notice, pause, and ask yourself what you actually want. Because sometimes healing isn't about becoming someone completely new. Sometimes it's about finally giving yourself permission to be the woman that you've been editing out of the room. You don't have to take up the whole room, sis. Just stop apologizing for the space that belongs to you. I'll see you next time on Power in the Pause.